Hello everyone, welcome back to English Champion. Before we dive in, I wanted to just share with you something I thought was very interesting that I came across lately. I saw that data on podcasts, and it said only a small fraction of podcasts, approximately 8.5%, ever reach 50 episodes. 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. Well, we are approaching 50 episodes here pretty soon. This, I believe, is episode 43. So we're already way past what most people do. I appreciate everyone who tunes in and listens either on Substack or on YouTube or wherever you track it down. Links on Twitter, all those kinds of things, because we're moving forward. Whether people are listening or not, we're going to keep going. And we've already survived way longer than most episodes do, or most podcast programs do. So thank you again for listening. Today, I want to dive into something that has to do with AI, and it has to do with data analysis. We keep hearing how various AI programs and platforms are going to replace all sorts of jobs. They're going to do all sorts of analysis for us. And I wanted to show you something that, at least right now, the AI does not do very well, all right, regarding data analytics. And in fact, human beings who have background knowledge and experience are way better at using inductive reasoning to look at patterns of data and, again, use some background knowledge and experience to draw out better conclusions than the AI could ever possibly do. So I'm going to walk you through some examples here, and I'm going to connect it to something I know a lot about, okay, just to show you like that background knowledge still wins when you're dealing with AI. Again, as we've said on this show for many times now, if you're dealing with young kids and they don't know any better, yeah, the AI looks like it knows what it's talking about. It looks like it's very helpful, and in many cases, it might be. But the distinction is, once you're pretty smart and you have, again, background knowledge and experience, you can still be better than the AI. And that's why I believe so much in human education, because, again, at least for now, the AI is tapped out on certain things it can do. It does a very good job of accumulating data. It does even a good job of generalizing various trends and offering kind of vague explanations, as I'll show you here in a second. But it does not do a good job of getting down into the details and truly understanding the story underneath the numbers. And so that's what I'm going to show you here today. So I hope you enjoy. And again, I'm using a topic I know a lot about, which is college, higher education, especially from a Christian perspective. Okay. Now, this isn't this isn't a religious topic. I'm just narrowing down the topic of higher education to certain types of schools. Okay. Just to make it a little bit more manageable here. Okay. And to keep the data at a limited set. Now, just generally speaking, I believe in Christian college education. I attended a Christian college. My father's been a professor at a Christian college for decades. I've worked at various Christian colleges. I know people who work at various Christian colleges around the country. I visited a number of Christian colleges around the country. This is my world. I've also been a part of public colleges. You know, my grad school is at public colleges. I've taught at major public universities. So I know that world as well. But this is my preference. And what I kind of chose to devote my career to, just because it's an environment I feel very comfortable in, and it's, to be honest, I believe in teaching morality alongside normal education skills and topics. And so that is what you get at various Christian colleges. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Again, this topic is not about anything religious. It's just to talk about these certain types of schools, because that's what I know the most about. All right. So what I want to show you is various data points that I've selected to determine what is going on at certain schools. And the reason that I was thinking about this is I've seen a lot of reports and articles and press releases about various schools and how they're doing and what new things they're having on their campus and how their numbers are panning out over the course of, from year to year and all that stuff. And I see some schools are doing very well. And so there's one school that I constantly hear about that is one of the fastest growing schools in the country. All right. That's like their big pitch is, look how fast we're growing. This is how successful we are. It's like, okay, great. That sounds nice. But what's going on there? Why is it growing so much? what could other schools be doing to learn from that and maybe copy it and implement those strategies. And so I know what the school says because I read their press releases and I can follow what they do. I can look at their website and they tell me all the great things they're doing. And that's totally fine because that's what marketing is. You're telling people, customers, various visitors to your school, what you think you do well and why you're good. Okay, totally normal. But again, you're only getting the most positive things because they're trying to sell you on their school. So what I did is I went onto AI and I typed in the prompts and I said, hey, here's this school. They claim to be one of the fastest growing Christian colleges in the country. What are they doing so great that is helping them be successful and grow? And basically what the AI did was it drew and compiled all the bullet points from various websites and from the school website that were all the positive things about how it's been growing. So the AI didn't discern anything. It didn't clarify. It didn't pull out the most relevant data. It just compiled everything that it gathered from the rest of the internet and said, well, it looks like here's what they're doing to grow so well. Here's why they're being successful. So again, it didn't judge, it didn't assess whether what they were saying is accurate or not, or if the things they're saying are actually useful and correlative to growth, or if they're just things they're doing that may or may not influence the growth. It just presented a bunch of information, and it expected the reader to go, oh, this answered my question. After all, I said, why is the school doing so well? Why is it growing so much? Well, all it did was regurgitate what it had found everywhere else. It didn't actually analyze the data. So, because again, I know a lot about what goes on at Christian colleges, I thought, well, wait a second. There's also some weird stuff going on because I can see in the data that there's some potential problems. Amid all the good stuff, when you look a little more closely, there's some problems as well. And so I asked the AI, I said, okay, so the school is doing very well. How come then there's these pretty big statistical problems? Like this is kind of a concern. So what's going on there? Why are they having this problem if everything is going so well? The AI had a hard time determining that. And basically what it spit out was, well, here are some general things that happens when any company or especially schools grow quickly. They're unable to provide certain resources because the pace of growth has kind of outstripped the things they can provide for that growth, which all makes very good sense, except there's more to this story because you're not sharing with me, the AI isn't sharing with me, what exactly is going on at that school. Why is that school having such a problem with a couple of these statistical areas? All it did was provide me very vague, very broad answers that might be true in the general. This might be true across the board at all types of universities. They tend to sort of have these problems. But again, my question for the AI was, this school says it has all these things that are going well. However, I can tell in the data that there are a couple of problems here. Why are they having these problems if everything is going so well? What's the disconnect? Why are they seemingly so successful here, but also struggling here? What's going on? And how come they're only telling us that everything's great when they aren't being, forthright about some of the problems they're having, which again is normal. No company is going to be open about the problems they're having. They're going to tell you all the good stuff. So that's totally fine. But that's what the AI is supposed to be for, right? We constantly hear that AI is going to help us analyze data so that we can pull out the most important truths, and then we can do whatever we want with it, make some sort of judgment, evaluate it in some way, and decide how we want to interact with it. So I'm asking the AI, please tell me, what are they doing that's so great? But if everything's so great, why are they having these problems? Why the disconnect? What's happening here? Well, it couldn't tell me. So because I'm smarter than the computer when it comes to this anyway, I can look more closely at the data because of my understanding of what goes on at these types of schools, and because I've been around so many over the years, and I understand how the Christian college or small college more broadly environment works. I can actually tell a story. I can pull out a story from the numbers that makes way more sense than anything the AI provided, because again, the AI just provided a very broad general overview that said, well, sometimes when schools do this, this can be a consequence that they didn't anticipate. Yeah, maybe, but I want to know what's specifically happening here, and I have a better answer because I know how to look at the data better than the AI does. So you can't just trust the AI to give you conclusions. It doesn't do a good job of inductive reasoning. Human beings, if they have background knowledge and experience, are much better at this. So let me give you some examples of data that are really useful for understanding what goes on at these types of schools, all types of small schools, but in this case, I'm specifically picking out Christian colleges just to keep them all, to make the comparisons very fair. And so I want to show you some data that might give a hint as to what is going on at these types of schools that claim that things are really positive, but there's also some problems that they have a hard time explaining, but I can tell you the explanation. So what I did here is I pulled, as I was looking at this one school, I pulled out 8 other schools as comparison. Okay. So I have 9 total schools here that I'm going to share with you. And in order to make this fair, I made them all very similar in size. They're all within 1,000 students. So I don't have any small, tiny schools. And then I don't have, Liberty University, which is a massive, enormous school. I'm not comparing those types of schools. So their undergraduate enrollment, I tried to keep as similar as possible so that the numbers stay similar. These are all schools that would be in direct competition with one another. These would be schools that any student who's looking to go to a Christian college, all of these schools would be recruiting that student. Okay, they're all the same type of school. None of them offer any super unique curriculum or majors that are wildly different than any other school. None of them are specialized in some way where certain schools are super engineering focused or something like that. These are all just general liberal arts Christian colleges. Okay, they're all similar to each other, same size, and again, I'm making it fair so that we can get an accurate comparison of what's going on at these schools as close as we can. All right. So one of the things that I pulled out here was, in order to highlight some of the potential problems at this other school that I was looking at, is just their overall enrollment, and then how that enrollment is broken down by gender. All right. You might think, well, this doesn't matter. Anyone can go to school. In the current environment where everyone says everyone's equal anyway, it shouldn't matter what genders are at schools and it shouldn't matter what the ratio is. But it kind of does. And especially at Christian colleges, there is a general historical trend that is kind of useful to think about. All right. Because the school I'm going to show you is completely different than that. So you might go, well, that's a bit weird. Why is that? So in general, at Christian colleges, again, generally speaking, most of them have a quite a bit higher female population than male population. Now that's becoming more true across all universities, as I think the female ratio has tipped up towards 55%. I think it's 55-45 that go to college in general at any university. But at Christian colleges, it's even higher than that. When I was in school in the late 90s, my Christian college, the thought on campus was that it was 3-to-1 female to male. I don't know if it was quite that high. That seems very high, but it was definitely 65-35 female, if not 70-30. All right. So very high percentages of female to male. And so as you'll see on the data here, almost all these schools follow that trend. Why that is, I don't exactly know. My assumption is that females are much more likely to go to a school that advocates a certain level of morality. That's something females tend to value a bit more than 18-year-old young men. And so it tends to be a safer environment. It tends to be, again, an environment where people are more focused on proper behavior, hopefully proper effort with their schoolwork. There's not as many crazy distractions that you get at state universities and stuff like that. So females who are a little more conscientious tend to like that environment. And so you, generally speaking, at most Christian colleges have a very tilted population towards females. And you'll see that on this list. I've also included retention rate. That is when you start college, if you stay into your second year. All right. It's a key number that all colleges try to boost as high as they can, because if you can get a kid to stay 1 year, it's easier to get that kid to stay 2, 3, 4 years. If you lose that kid in the first year, something is really a problem at your school, because the first year should be the most exciting year. You haven't gotten into very difficult coursework yet because you're not in your major yet. You're just doing all the basic stuff. You're making new friends. You're getting involved in fun activities. Um, you know, there's just a lot of fun things to do. And you chose that college, so you'd think, well, you probably want to stay because you chose it. And so if you lose kids after that first year, it's a bit of a red flag. So we're going to look at retention rate. We're going to look at graduation rate for bachelor's students on a 6-year time frame. Again, that seems very generous, but that is sort of the industry standard. Most kids, of course, graduate in 4 years, but of course, some have to go a little slower through their program, and so we actually most data gives it on a 6-year time frame. So most schools at the Christian college level, small colleges, if you're above 60%, you're probably doing okay. Elite universities in the country, the Stanfords, the MITs, these schools, they're at like 98, 99% because those students specifically want to go to that school and they want to graduate from that school. They want to tell people they got a degree from Stanford, so they stay. Those schools lose hardly anybody. The smaller school you get, the less famous school you're at, that number drops quite a bit. But if you can stay above 60%, you're probably doing okay. If you're below 50, if you're below 60, you probably have some things you need to improve a lot on. You start drifting down towards 50%, you have very serious problems, and you're below 50, that's a real red flag. And so we're going to look at some schools' graduation rates. Because there is a gender imbalance, one key statistic to really look at is male graduation rate. Again, males in general are not graduating with the level of success that females are. So across the board, across the country at all schools, the male graduation rate is down. But we want to see at certain schools, how are they appealing to males, especially at Christian colleges where males are already outnumbered? Are the ones that do go there, are they staying and are they serious about school? And how many of them last to all 4 years? So that we're going to look at male graduation rate. Just to give a bit of minority representation here, we're going to look at the Black enrollment and graduation rate. Some of these depend on kind of the city you're in, or the state you're in. Obviously, certain parts of the country have higher African American populations than others, so we'll see if that affects anything. But I'm going to pull out a data point here that I think you'll find interesting regarding not just the overall graduation rate, not just the overall male graduation rate, but the African American enrollment and graduation rate as well. I also want you to show you instructional spending in relative in comparison to student services spending, and I'll get into what those numbers represent here shortly. I also wanted to show you the number of full-time faculty at these schools, because the amount of faculty you have are a good indicator of how serious you are about academics. And then I'm also going to give you one final piece of evidence that has nothing to do with the students, but it might be an indicator of what the school values and where it's spending its money. If they're having academic problems, is there somewhere that they're overspending when they should be spending more for students? So these are the categories I'm going to share with you. So again, we have 9 total schools. They're all very similar. And I've tried to be as fair as possible. I've pulled all of this from publicly available resources, from the National Center of Education Statistics, IPEDS reporting, which are, again, available to all on the internet. You just go and do a search for it and you'll find it. So I didn't make up any of these numbers. I didn't fudge any of these numbers. I didn't make false comparisons. These are all schools that are very similar to each other, that any student who wants to go to a Christian college would look at all these schools equally. And so I just wanted to compare the data. That's all we're focusing on here, okay? So here's School A. Enrollment for undergrads, just over 2,000. 67% female, so that's a bit high, but that's pretty normal, actually, for Christian colleges. Retention rate over 75%, which is pretty good. You want to keep that at 75 to 80%, if not higher. If you're below 75, probably not good. So they're doing okay. Graduation rate over 60%, which is decent. Their Black enrollment is 8%, which is actually a pretty decent number, relatively speaking here. And of those students, 57% graduate. So they're inching closer to what the overall graduation rate is. Male graduation rate is 56%. So male graduation rate lower than the overall graduation rate. So that's, again, not great, but as you'll see, the numbers, depending on the school, are going to adjust. Instructional spending. This school spends a lot on their students. So that means professors, classroom materials and resources, lab stuff, anything that helps students in their classrooms with learning. So they spend a lot, and their student services spending, which is all the other extracurricular sorts of things on campus, about $6,000. That's pretty average for these types of schools. So they actually do a great job of devoting a lot of their resources to the classroom and to the teachers to help students. All right, so this is a school that, at least according to the money, seems very devoted to helping their students be academically successful. All right. Again, they have a pretty decent retention rate. Graduation rate could be higher, but compared to these schools they're competing with, this is pretty normal. And they seem to be doing a pretty good job on instructional spending. They have a high number of full-time faculty, which is good. And here's the final category: president's salary, which is just as a comparison of, okay, if the school is doing well, are they compensating the president well? If the school is struggling, are they compensating the president accordingly? Or does the compensation not have anything to do with any of it? Who knows? But this school, they tend to pay their president a very high salary for a small college. But it doesn't take away from their instructional spending. It's not taking away from them hiring faculty. And again, their overall performance of how students complete their education is still pretty good. So, these people who work at this university might say, yeah, it's worth it, and that's why we pay them that much. Okay, who knows? Okay, so here's another school, a bit smaller, only 1,000 students. I kept all these within 1,000 so that we didn't, again, have a school with only 1,000 and then another school with 10,000 or something like that, or even 5,000. All of these are within 1,000 to 2,000. That's the range. Again, more female than male, 57% female. Retention rate a bit lower, 69%. Graduation rate, 61%. Black enrollment, 6%. And of those, 50% graduate. So, it's not terrible. Male graduation rate, 60%, which is pretty close to the overall graduation rate. So that's not bad. Their spending on what goes on in the classroom versus what goes on outside the classroom is pretty even. We'd like to see the instructional spending higher, but at least the bottom number isn't out of control. This school does not have a lot of full-time faculty, so that would be a red flag for students looking at types of schools to go to. Theirs, as you can see, is way lower. Now, they are half the size, but they certainly aren't half the teachers. If this were half, this would be up around 85 to 90, and it's not even anywhere near that. So they clearly, by their instructional spending and the number of full-time faculty, aren't putting a lot of their resources toward the classrooms, which is probably not great. President makes almost $400,000. That's quite a bit for a school that is pretty small and isn't devoting a lot of resources to the classroom. So the president here is probably making way more than the faculty, which isn't usually a good thing. Here's another school, sort of in the middle of the first two, 1,600 students, very high female population, 72% female. Retention rate higher, 81%. So they do a good job of, once kids are there, they want to stay there. Graduation rate is higher as well, 68%. That's pretty good. Black graduation rate, even though they only 5% of their students are African American, 85% of them graduate. So they do a good job with that. Male graduation rate in general, though, is quite low, only 47%. So they're losing half their males all the time. Over their 4 years, half of them disappear. So that's not great. Instructional spending is well above other student service spending, so that's good. Even though the overall number is a bit low, at least the top number is higher than the bottom number. They have a lot of full-time faculty for a school this size, so that's pretty good. And they pay their president a very reasonable amount, even though that $164,000 is still a lot of money. At a small school, that is a pretty normal amount. And what the school does a good job of is they pay a lot of professors. So they're doing a good job of keeping faculty. And looks like one of the ways they do that is they focus on faculty more than administrative spending. So they're doing a good job with that. Here's another school, almost 2,000 enrollment, 65% female, 74% retention rate. Again, pretty good. 56% graduation rate, not great. That's a pretty big gap. They're losing 20% of their students on a regular basis. Again, sort of a normal black enrollment rate of 5%, 30% of them graduate, so quite a bit lower than the previous schools. And overall male graduation rate is only 50%. But their instructional spending is a lot higher than their student service spending. They have a pretty decent amount of full-time faculty. Again, less than the other schools, but certainly not at the bottom. But they pay their president quite a bit of money. Now, this school is in a very expensive city, so that could be part of it. But for the low graduation rates here, that is a very high number. The school is not performing that well if it's losing that many students, and yet they're paying their president quite a high salary. Here's another school. Strangely, this is our first school that has a subtle flip in the gender ratio. This school actually has 52% male and 48% female. They have a very good retention rate, 85%. Graduation rate, 64%, which is decent. It's over that 60 mark. They don't get a lot of African American students there, but those that do, half of them graduate. And male graduation rate, 59%. Again, not great, but better than some on this list. Again, they do a good job of putting their money in the classroom. Good ratio there. They don't have as many professors, so they could be doing better with that, but they also don't pay their president as much either. So this is a pretty normal kind of lineup of data here where if you're not going to spend a lot for faculty, then you probably shouldn't be spending a lot for administration either. And it looks like they, in general, are not. So at least this is sort of balanced out. Here's another school, the smallest, close to our smallest on our list, just over 1,100 students. Again, higher females than males, 57% female, 70% retention rate. Not super great. They need to do a better job of that. Graduation, only 57%. Again, it's better to get above 60. Not great as far as their African American graduation rate either. And male graduation rate is just above 50%. They do a decent job of instructional spending. They keep that higher than the other extracurricular spending, but they also don't have that many faculty, and they probably pay their administrator, comparatively speaking, more than other schools in this situation should. So this is a school that definitely needs improvement, particularly regarding their graduation rates and their increasing of full-time faculty. Here's another school, just over 1,100 again, 58% female, retention rate 79%, so a bit better, that's good. Graduation rate right at 60%. This school does not have very many African American students. Male graduation rate 61%, so it's basically right on par with the general population, so they're doing pretty well with that. Again, another school with higher instructional spending than other extracurricular services spending, which is good. They have a pretty fair number of full-time faculty, which is good, almost 100 full-time faculty, and they pay their president $240,000, which is, again, kind of average, probably a little high based on its graduation rate being right on average. And they could probably afford to kick more of that money towards professors than the administration. Here's another school. This is probably the most well-known school on our list here. Just over 2,000 students, 55% female. So this is sort of representative of the general college population across the country. At most schools, it's about 55, 45. Very high retention rate, 94%. Students that want to go there want to stay there. So they're doing a good job of retaining their students. Graduation rate, 87%. That's fantastic. Their African-American graduation rate, even though they don't have a lot of African-American students, over half of them graduate. Male graduation rate is 83%. So the guys that show up, they want to finish. A lot of instructional spending. So they do a good job of devoting whatever resources they bring in toward the classroom so that the students get the maximum benefit of learning on this campus. They spend higher on student services than the previous schools we've looked at, but this is a school that is very successful. They bring in a lot of money. They put that towards 193 full-time faculty. When you've only got 2,100 undergraduate students, but they have 193 full-time faculty, that's an amazing ratio. And for all this success, it looks like they've chosen to pay their president quite high, over $500,000 a year. But you can kind of understand this school is also in a fairly expensive metro area. But look at the data. Their school is very successful, very prominent, well-known school, and so they have chosen to compensate the president accordingly. Now, here's a comparison school that I started with. Population just over 1,200. We have a very out of balance, according to the averages, gender ratio happening here. unlike all the other schools, including the one above, which was just barely higher with males, this one is well higher. 57% male, only 43% female. So something's going on there. How did they draw this many males to this school? That's something for us to think about. Retention rate, whoa, 55%. By far the lowest among their competitors. Graduation rate, 41%. Very low. That's one of the lowest in the country. And by far lower than its competitors. So when students are looking at schools, these are all the schools they would be looking at the same time, and this one is way lower for graduation rate. They have a higher black enrollment rate, even though this school is in a city that actually doesn't have as many African Americans in it or in the whole state as other schools on this list. And yet their graduation rate among that population, only 8%. So they're getting more black students, but almost none of them stay to graduate. Male graduation rate, 35%. Again, by far the lowest out of all their competitors' rates. Instructional spending, they spend by far the lowest on the classroom. They spend the lowest on classroom resources, classroom technology, professors. As we can see by the only 34 full-time faculty, that number is very, very low compared to all these other schools that have roughly the same population, and yet many of these schools have at least double, should be actually triple the number of faculty. And they spend more on extracurricular things like sports. That's going to be a key factor here in a second, than they do on the classroom. By far, $12,000, even more than the previous school, which is a very successful school. This school spends more than the previous one, and yet these are the results they get from their academic data. And yet, in the final column, president's salary. This school spends more on their president than almost any other school in the whole country regarding schools of this size and in this demographic, this Christian college demographic. So why are they spending so much for this president when the results they get are so poor? What is going on at this school? So that's what I asked the AI. I said, okay, so I hear so much about how much they're growing. They're one of the fastest growing schools in the country over the last 10 years. Sounds like they're really successful. Great. But I see they also have really, really bad graduation rates and retention rates. Why is that, AI? Can you tell me what's going on there? And again, the AI couldn't tell me. But if you look at the data, you can figure out the story that's underneath the numbers. So let's think about this. How could a school that is, like all schools, they're trying to get students. How can you get students? And how do you end up getting this many more male students than female students? How are you getting so many guys when across the whole country, guys are not going to college as much as they used to? They're way behind females in going to college. And yet at this school, the men outnumber the women by quite a wide margin. How is that? Do they offer some very uniquely male-centric majors that everyone wants to go study? Nope. They offer the same majors as every other school. Because these are Christian colleges, is this a school that just really appeals to men who are going to be these great church leaders and biblical scholars? Nope. A small percentage of these students actually major in theology. They're way higher in majors in other types of majors. So it's not the Christian stuff. It's not the theology stuff. What is it? Why are men coming to this school? Well, again, if you look at the student services spending, what's included in student services spending? Sports spending. So this is a school that devotes tons of whatever revenue they get to funding sports teams. They pay their coaches, they're providing, scholarships for athletes, all this stuff. Okay, so what's happening? Well, wait a second. Which this might be great. Okay, if you want to get students, many schools across the country have gone to the sports growth model. Okay, that's totally normal. Again, I don't really like it. I'd rather you grow academically. But okay, if you want to do this, fine. As long as it works, fine. But again, look at the numbers. Only 55% of students overall are staying. So what's happening is they spend a ton of money starting sports programs. And the sports, they then allows them to go recruit all of these males, because males are the ones who tend to play sports, obviously, especially big sports like football, where you can have, hundreds of students on a team. It's very different than, your golf team that's only going to have 5 to 10 players. Your football team can have 200. So that's where they're spending their money, is recruiting these students. But then what happens to them? They don't stay. Retention rate is super low. Graduation rate is very low. Male graduation rate is even lower. And African American graduation rate is even lower than that, if you can believe it. So what's happening? Again, the AI can't tell us. The AI just says, well, maybe they've grown so fast, they just don't have enough resources. Wait a second. According to the money they're spending, they have plenty of resources. They're spending it all on sports and other campus activities, which again sounds nice because you're like, oh, I want to make the campus fun for kids. But what's a college campus for? Specifically, a Christian college campus. It's for education. And this particular school, compared to its competitors, is way, way below in all the metrics. So why are these kids not staying? If they're so excited to attend this school because it's growing faster than any other Christian college in the country, why aren't they graduating? Well, it's quite obvious. Again, if you have any experience, and again, this helps you know more than AI does. Well, if you fill your student body with athletes, again, nothing wrong with athletes. I was a college athlete. So, I believe in college sports. But if you fill your school with college athletes who maybe didn't really care about your school, like the academics, or in this case, the spiritual side of your school from the beginning, and they're just there to play sports, well, it's not so hard to understand that if those students, because you flooded your campus with this many students, start to realize, wait a second, the coaches told me I was going to be able to play my sport here, but there's like dozens, if not hundreds of other athletes here. I'm not going to be able to play. Well, of course, they just leave. And so the retention rate and the graduation rate plummet. Or what happens in these situations is they're drawn to the school by the sports, but again, maybe they aren't great academically. And so even though the student likes the school, even though the student is playing on their sports team, they might find that they're not good enough academically to stay. And so their grades drop. Maybe they become ineligible and they go, I can't afford to stay here anymore. My grades aren't good enough. College is harder than I thought. I got to leave. And so they do. So when I ask AI, hey, how come their retention and graduation rates are so low? If they're growing so much, if they're such a successful school, how come these couple data points down here are so bad? Well, you have to know the background of what goes on at small colleges. And based on what I've learned about this small college, they invested all of their energy into sports, not academics. And this is the result. They get kids who come there who don't care about academics. How do we know? Because they leave. They either didn't care about academics or they didn't care about the school itself. They're like, yeah, the academics are fine, but I don't really like being here. I don't like the churchy stuff. I'd rather be in a different city or closer to my family or whatever the reason is. That's why they leave. So you have to understand what the data means and the mentality of, or the environment of these types of schools in order to understand what are the trends doing. It looks like the trends are going this way, but there's also some data pointing this way. Well, why is that? Well, you got to know this stuff. You have to have background knowledge and experience. I've been on Christian college campuses since I was 9 years old, so 37 years. So I know Christian colleges inside and out. So that's how I know that this is probably what's going on. And this is why it's so important that schools stick to a proper mission and vision instead of making their sole focus growth. Because when you do that, all students is a math equation to you. And so this is what's happening with this particular school, where you just go, well, yeah, we have a horrible graduation rate and retention rate. Kids clearly don't want to stay here. They don't like our school. We sold them on it, and they thought they liked it at first, but clearly they don't like it enough to want to stay here. But as long as the numbers coming in are higher than the numbers going out, then we win. So keep it up. And we can keep saying that we're we're one of the top growing colleges in the country. It's like, yeah, but you're basically like a bucket where you're pouring all the water in and then it's falling out the bottom. And you're like, yeah, but look how much water we have. Look, we have so much water. We're flush with water. And you're like, yep, it's all pouring out the bottom. That's not good for your bucket. All right. So this is what's happening, where you have to wonder, why are we doing this? Why are we pushing something where our students don't actually want to be here? And how are we getting them? What's our what's our messaging for these students? Because it kind of looks like, according to the data, when you're looking at males, and in this case, black males, I just picked them as one category. You could look at any other demographic, but is it possible that the school is kind of just using those kids because males, and particularly black males, are you might say have higher interest in playing sports at a higher level than any other group of young people? Are you just using them to get them into your school to say that you're growing? Because all of those kids, not all of them, but the majority of them are going to leave within a year or two. Because the graduation rate and retention rates for those kids, males in general and black students, black males in general, are horrible. So why did you get them on your campus? Was it just to say you're growing? Was it just to boost your numbers to make it look like things are going really well? Because clearly the numbers say it's not going well. So again, it goes back to, what do you believe in as a school? And as someone who believes in Christian education, as I said at the top, this is very disconcerting to me, where I look at that and I go, it seems like you have different goals. It seems like you have a different mission than true academics, than true spiritual development, than true human potential, and human flourishing in the Aristotelian sense. It seems like you're just trying to get as many kids here on your campus as possible, and you'll tell them, hey, come play a sport. And then they realize, yeah, that wasn't real, and so I'm not going to stay here. And so they go. Because that's what it looks like. That's what the numbers are pointing to. So until that school can demonstrate that you're actually doing something different than that, this looks like the story that's happening, and it's not a good story. And then when you add to it that the president gets to make more money than everyone else by far, so the goal becomes, let's grow as much as possible so that the president can pocket as much money as possible. Is that the mission that you want for your school? Because that doesn't seem like an appropriate mission for a Christian college that's supposed to care about its students and care about its teachers, when the data is really bad and yet the president is doing very, very well. Doesn't seem quite fair. So, this is the dilemma that you're dealing with when you're dealing with AI or anything that doesn't truly have critical thinking or inductive reasoning, where you can look at a pile of data and then go, okay, well, what does all this data actually mean? The AI is great at summarizing it. It says, here's all this data. Look at it. And you ask what it means, and it goes, well, I don't quite know for sure. In general, this is maybe what it means, but, every school is different, so I don't know. Well, those of us who do know can look at this data and go, oh, I see what the problem is here. You're a disaster when it comes to your academics. You're a disaster in recruiting way too many men to fill way too many sports teams. And lo and behold, the guys who come there find out they don't actually care that much about school, and they leave. So that's why I can read the data. I didn't need AI to tell me that, because AI couldn't tell me that. I know it because I'm smarter than the AI when it comes to this topic. So this is why we have to do a better job of teaching our students how to think like people, how to get experience in real world situations, and not just trust what a computer spits out. Because I asked the computer to spit it out, and it couldn't do it. All it gave me were the bullet points that came from the school itself. And of course, the school is going to paint itself in the most positive light. It's not going to tell you the full story about what's going on underneath. So this is like the dark underbelly that it takes smart people to figure out so that people can make good decisions. And if they want to continue going to this school, that's fine. That's their choice. But you also can't just believe all the marketing you hear. You have to look more closely at the data and figure out, wait a second, I see this number, but I also see this number. And those two things shouldn't go together. If everything is good, you shouldn't have this number going on. If your school is so great, then everyone who comes there should want to stay. But they aren't. In fact, they drop out more there than any other school. That's a huge problem. Now, that number, graduation rate, can be gamed, okay? Even though it's one of the most important statistics. I wrote an article about a year and a half ago on Substack about the book Metrics That Matter. And one of the key indicators of a school's success is its graduation rate. The other is its instructional spending. And this school is the worst on this whole list, and some of the worst in the whole country at those two metrics, okay? So that's how you know if the school is generally of high quality or not, all right? So if you compare schools like Stanford, 99% graduation rate. Instructional spending through the roof. They devote tons of resources to all their labs, to getting the best professors, any sort of tutoring. All that stuff is all about instruction because they want their kids to be the smartest in the whole country. Yeah, those are the metrics that matter. All right. Now, every metric can be gamed, and that book talks about all the other ways that all the other metrics can be gamed. But even graduation rate can be gamed, and you can guess as to how that happens. Well, all the school needs to do is start saying, hey, let's not grade so hard. Because after all, if we give low grades, then the students' GPA goes down and they get really discouraged and they go, I don't want to stay here and spend this money to get these low grades. And so they leave and go to a state school, go to a community college, whatever. So especially if a school is expensive, you also have an incentive to fudge your numbers or to game the system. So we'll have to be on the lookout for this school to see how their graduation rate does in subsequent years, because it's been ever since they started this sports push, their graduation rate has declined. And so I'm sure they know this doesn't look good and they're going to try to figure that out. And I can guarantee one of the ways they're going to try to fix that is make everything easier, because that's the easiest way to game this system. Because if you're having this much success and you're promoting growth so much, then you're just going to keep doing that. You're going to keep bringing in students who are not qualified to be there, because this school also decreased their academic standards over the years. They used to be at a certain number of requirement to get into the school. They lowered it, and that's how they've grown. So they've grown on bringing in worse students academically and more athletes who don't care about school. And so that's why they don't stay. They can't cut it in the classroom, or they just find out they don't like it there and they go. So again, we'll have to see how this school adapts to this data. It's been this way a while. They haven't adapted yet. So we'll see if they start changing that once this information becomes more public, if it ever will. But that number, the graduation rate can be gamed too. Again, you can fudge that by just making everything easier, and that will entice students to stay, because now you're giving A's and B's to students who actually deserve D's and F's, and now they think they're good students, and then they get to stay and graduate. But as I say on so many other podcasts, those also become the students that everyone in the working world looks at and go, you're not qualified for a job here. Why aren't you prepared? Didn't you go to college? Why aren't you smart enough to work at my company? Because that's what employers are saying. So we'll have to watch this and see what's happening here. But what's also crazy about these numbers is these are all federal database, like national statistics that the schools themselves provide. All right, these aren't like gone in by the Department of Ed or anything and like confiscated without the school's knowledge. The school themselves have to provide this. So this is the best version of any data you're ever going to get. So when the numbers are this low, you're like, holy cow, is it worse than this actually? Did they actually fudge some of this to make this look sort of reputable? Because this is the best the numbers can possibly be. And if they're this bad, that means it's probably something even worse is going on there than what we even see here. Because, like anything, you're going to put your best foot forward and you're going to try to make your statistics look as good as they can. If this is as good as they can look, whoa, this school has serious problems. Okay. And again, as someone who advocates and has supported Christian colleges my whole life, this makes me sad because I want Christian colleges to be successful. But when I see articles about this university and how it's constantly promoting growth and how successful it is and how great it is, and I'm like, well, wait a second, the data says it's not great. So what's the truth here? Well, you have to know the story behind the numbers. You have to have some inductive reasoning skills to figure out how it's not as good as the advertising might say it is. So there's some data for you, all right? But the lesson here is that knowledge and experience still beats AI, at least for now. We'll see if AI gets better at any of this stuff. But right now, when you ask AI questions about data analysis, it can only do a pretty superficial, generic job. It doesn't know everything that a human being does. So you might want to listen to human beings, at least smart human beings with background knowledge and experience, before you go rushing to using AI to try to solve all your problems, either at your business or at your school or wherever you use numbers and analytics to project for the future or to do assessment on how your company's doing or any of that stuff. You might want to have human beings look at it instead, because that's how you'll get the truth of what's going on. So there's some AI talk for you, some higher education talk for you, and ways to look at numbers that reveal a deeper story than just what you see on the surface. Hope that was interesting. Keep checking back. We'll have another podcast coming up soon. Thanks for watching. See you next time.